So we're going to call this In the Library. What are you reading, Eric?
Well, I just finished a book called Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, Chinese-American author. And it is fabulous. And the reason I want to talk about it is because I just read Celeste Ng tweeted recently that Reese Witherspoon and Kerry Washington have bought the rights to Little Fires Everywhere, so they could make it into something, a mini series. I hope, because there's a lot in that book, and I would hate to see it smushed down to a 2-hour movie.
About?
It's about it's about like a whole web of characters, but I believe that Kerry and Reese are probably going to end up playing the two moms in the story. One is a landlady, one is the tenant. And their kids become friends, and so the families get a little tangled up. But then the town gets embroiled in this big controversy, and because one of them's richer, they know the rich people on the side of this controversy. One of them is poorer, so they know the poor people on this side of the controversy, and the controversy in the town ends up creating this rift between these two families.
Oh, okay.
It's very intense, but the teenage stuff is really fun because all their kids are in high school, and so there's a lot of that. You know, it has a lot to say about moms and daughters specifically. The characters are so well drawn. I can really see why Reese, who did a great thing with Big Little Lies, I think she's picking this one up too. The other book that I'm in right now, I haven't finished it yet, is by a woman named Kathleen Rooney, and it's called Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk, which doesn't sound like it's got a whole lot of plot behind it, yeah? But Lillian Boxfish is an 85-year-old woman. It is New Year's Eve, 1984 in New York. So again, let me say 84 New York. This is like the Times Square was full of drug dealers,
Gotcha.
and it was a different town, right? And she's walking to dinner on New Year's Eve. She's taking herself out to dinner. She's an 85-year-old woman who is a hardened New York citizen for life. And as she passes by these different places in the city, she remembers these vignettes from her life. And so it kind of bounces around her entire 85 years of existence. But she lived through the Roaring Twenties. She lived through the Depression. She lived through the war years. She said, I'll never get married and had a kid. She gets married and has a kid. And, all of this, she is Auntie Mame, Carrie Bradshaw, the Dowager Countess, and Irene Dunn, all fused into one person telling her life story. It's fabulous. Okay,
2 different kinds of books. And again, real quick, the title and the author.
Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. You can find her on Twitter at outpronounced Ng, I-N-G, online. And then Lillian Boxfish Takes a Walk by Kathleen Rooney at Kathleen M. Rooney. Follow them both. They're fabulous.
Attention, attention. Top surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to Operating Room 1. Top surgeons Eric and Stacey, please report to Operating Room 1. Surgery is about to begin.
It's Pop43.
I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
And this week we are talking about this TV show.
Everybody's talking about this.
Everyone is. And everyone told me, Eric, you have to see this show, which of course made me really not want to watch the show.
Yeah, me too, I'll be honest with you. It took me a while. That's why we're talking about this like it's new. But it's not.
It's new-ish. I mean, it's new, it's out this year, but we were talking about The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Right. They don't have season 2 yet, so I suppose we're not too behind the times.
So this is, but it's a streaming thing. It's one of those things where Amazon Prime just dumped all these episodes right at once. So if you didn't watch them then, you can still watch them now. They're available. They are there on the streaming service for you. And yes, so many people were like, Eric, you've got to see the show. You've got to. It really kind of made me not want to. And then I watched the first 5 minutes of it, and I think because I wanted to be annoyed by it, I was annoyed by it.
Here's my thing is that, okay, it got dumped, and everybody in the first week who does that stupid, I'm sorry, I call it stupid. I don't have time to watch even, 7-8 hours. And I don't have that kind of time to just binge like that. So I have to do it a little, piece by piece. And we've talked about this before. Yeah. So everybody was like, yeah, you have to. But I'm with you. When people start yelling at me that I have to, no, I don't.
Yeah.
I do not. You are not my mom. I am not 12.
Exactly. And this is one of the few times where I watched it. It annoyed me after the first 5 minutes. I got past the first 5 minutes, and I kind of fell in love with it. I have to admit, all those people who were like, you have to, hello Faye, hello Sydney, they were kind of right, because it really was a great show for me to watch.
Okay, here's what I'm going to say. The first episode took me about 5 weeks to get through. I was watching it 10, 15 minutes at a pop.
Okay.
One, I didn't have the time. B, it didn't compel me. I was like, okay, all right, that's cute. And then I'd go to do something else or whatever. Then I was like, okay, I've got to get through this first episode. It's been, 2 months now.
Sure.
And so I finished the first episode and started the second episode. And I think I even finished the first episode and saw the second episode. And then I had to stop for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, it was like every couple of days I'd watch another episode. Mm-hmm. And then I watched the last 3, just bam, bam, bam.
Okay.
For me, it got better as it went along.
It got way better as it went along.
And I don't know what, the first episode's not bad. I don't want to say that. It's just that's how it did not compel me. That thing that annoyed you didn't compel me.
Okay, well, let's just, if you have no idea, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is a period piece set in
57.
The late 50s.
Well, yeah, in the 50s, because you do see some history of how they got there.
Yeah, but present day for this show is 1957, and then there's some flashbacks. So it's 1950s New York, and it's about basically a woman who kind of, I don't even say she wants to be a comedian. She stumbles into stand-up comedy as something to do with her life after her husband leaves her.
She was raised for a certain kind of life.
To be an Upper East Side Jewish housewife.
Right. You get married, you have kids, you stay at home, your husband works. That's the life you have.
And you do everything to support your husband.
But also, they lived like, 1 or 2 floors down in this high rise from their parents?
Yes,
from her parents?
In a 27-room apartment.
So she was actually, her aspirations were to have the life her mother had.
Yeah.
And that was just completely screwed up when her husband came in and said, he wanted a divorce. Yeah.
So the very first episode, what we see is the very first scene is their wedding. She's marrying this man, right? And she is giving her own wedding toast at her own wedding. And I think the very first line of the entire show is, now who gives a toast at their own wedding? And I'm like, I already don't like you. So, and then she's supposed to be out there and so witty and so clever. And even her husband is looking at her just adoringly. And it's very kind of hit over the head with a hammer. This woman is the stand-up comic that this whole thing is going to be about. And I just found the whole thing just kind of obvious and
Well, I think that first part was kind of you're going to love me. You're going to love her, I guess, is what the producers... Yes. And when somebody tells us that, as we've already said,
So I just automatically was like, nope, you're annoying. So then we get into the story. And in her married life, we kind of flash forward a little bit. She's got 2 kids, a young child and an infant.
Correct.
And her husband, we learn, has dreams of being a stand-up comic. And so she shows up every day with a casserole to give to the owner of this comedy club to try to get her husband a better slot in the lineup of this little Greenwich Village comedy club. Now, one of the things I will say about this show that I absolutely loved is in the 1950s, the completely different worlds they draw between the Upper East Side and Greenwich Village is just amazing. I mean, you can just tell with all of, it becomes like the Grace Kelly, kind of look, and all of a sudden we're surrounded by beatniks,
Correct.
It's just very, very cool the way they do that.
It feels very real, though. You feel like, okay, because we've seen documentaries even of people that were dressed like this, that were doing this, and these cave-like clubs where people started, their careers and that sort of thing. But there was a habit that this couple had. They would go I'm guessing once a week or so, to this comedy club. Her husband would, was open mic night.
Yep.
She'd put a casserole in to get her husband sometimes, a better slot, but sometimes just to get him on stage.
Because he sucks.
He really wasn't funny.
And we find out in the second episode, he's doing somebody else's bit. He didn't even write his own stuff.
Bob Newhart.
Yeah, he's doing Bob Newhart stuff. And of course, Midge, sweet as she is watching Bob Newhart on television. She runs into the kitchen going, honey, Bob Newhart stole your set. He must have heard about it from the Little Beatnik Comedy Club. No. And the husband's like, no, totally. It's like, I listened to the album and I'm totally copying his stuff. And she's like, you can't do that. And he's like, everybody does it. And, you know, even as somebody who's watching, I'm like, no, everybody doesn't. You're just full of shit and you're a really bad comedian. So the plot, you know, we don't want to give away too many spoilers for what the end of it is, but we can go ahead and give some of the setup because you're not too far into the series before he has a really bad night, like a really bad night. Even for him, he totally bombs and he knows it. And he's feeling very dejected and you know, like he's just, you know, all of his dreams are crumbling before him, and he just announces out of nowhere that he's leaving her.
Correct, but he also announces he's been having an affair with his secretary, so it's not like just that night.
Well, sure. But
yeah.
But I didn't the affair with the secretary, I just thought he was being just a typical Mad Men kind of jerk. Like, he's just an asshole. I don't think the affair with his secretary was prompting him to leave his wife. I don't think he ever even considered leaving his wife because of the secretary. I mean, he didn't leave Midge for her because she's awful like that. And I actually love the way that Amy Sherman Palladino kind of wrote that whole character. She's terrible. The secretary has nothing to redeem herself at all. Penny. Yeah. You know,
No, she really doesn't. But I think that he was unhappy. He didn't like his life, and he was having an affair. I guess he was doing everything that he thought an executive does.
Yeah.
And that's including having a pretty
bang your
secretary and having an affair with her. But when that really bad evening happens, it's like, I guess he feels like everything just perfect storm. Yeah. It's all happening at the same time. And you sit there and you go, what is the solution? And I guess in his head he thought, the solution is I leave this marriage. That's what's holding me down.
Well, and he blames her for his bad set because she was supposed to bring him a sweater and she didn't realize that his sweater was moth-eaten when she brought it. And so he got up there with a sweater with holes in it. And she, because she's got great comic instincts, says, use it. Just talk about the sweater with the holes in it, you know? And he tries, and he just doesn't know how to be authentic and funny in front of an audience. He's just not a funny person. So that night, after he announces that it's all over, she goes back to the club to retrieve her casserole dish. And she's drunk off her ass.
And she's still in the peignoir. Okay.
And she wanders on stage and just starts delivering this drunken rant about the fact that her husband left her. And my favorite character in the entire piece is this woman named Susie Meyerson, who sees her in the audience, who works at the comedy club, who has been dreaming of being an agent to a brilliant comedian her entire life, and looks at this woman and finally says, this is it. This is the woman I was meant to see and manage, and I'm going to make her a star.
This is my ticket. That's what she saw. Yeah. She saw the comic timing and everything. And this is before she realizes what she's done.
Yeah.
But what happens also on that night is that Midge, at some point, I forget during her thing, flashes the audience.
Yes.
She exposes her breasts. And then the cops raid the club, and she gets arrested.
Yeah.
Because that sets off, I mean, there's a lot of, it sets up a lot of domino effects after that.
But from there, basically, you know, we're not going to run down the plot of the whole, 8-episode arc, but she kind of embarks on with Susie, prodding her on, she kind of embarks on this life of being a stand-up comic. So let's just, backtrack a little bit and just take a look at some of the folks who are in this cast. Midge is played by a woman named Rachel Brosnahan, who I had never seen before.
I've never seen her before in my life.
I'd never seen her before. The one thing that she did do, which I had not seen and probably won't, is this little web series that Woody Allen did for Amazon Prime last year. He did this little thing called Crisis in 6 Scenes, where he and Elaine May played husband and wife, and Miley Cyrus was in it as this girl who kind of stumbles into their world. And
I will not be seeing it either, so that's okay.
And Rachel Brosnahan was in it, and I know that only because I saw her in a news thing, as one of the many, many, many actors in Hollywood who now are prostrating themselves saying, I'm so sorry I ever worked for Woody Allen. That was such a huge mistake. And I'm like, look, you weren't even Mrs. Maisel when you took that job. Of course you're going to, it's an Amazon web series. You take the job, whatever.
You do.
Alex Borstein, who is probably best known for being a voice on Family Guy. She is the wife on Family Guy.
Yeah,
Lois.
But I've also seen her. She's guest starred on so many things.
Yeah,
and
you know this face.
You know her. When you see her, you go, oh, I've seen her before. She is fabulous.
She's fantastic. She's my favorite character in this whole piece.
I have not seen her do one line with a wrong, what I consider a wrong interpretation.
Yeah. No, she
nail.
knows who Susie is to her bones, and just and doesn't overact, doesn't chew scenery, just is kind of.
She's not a caricature, and this character could be
Very
a caricature, and she is not. She's believable, and she is sympathetic, and she's oh my God, she has some of the best lines.
Yes. And really excellent timing. I mean, just knows how to just nail it without seeming like she's trying, which, of course, is the hardest thing to do. Tony Shalhoub and Maren Hinkle play Midge's parents. I love Tony Shalhoub.
I adore Tony Shalhoub. And it's interesting that in this role, I'm not saying he's not good, but I wanted to like him more in this role. He doesn't feel comfortable. You know who does is the father-in-law,
Kevin Pollak.
Kevin Pollak is wonderful as her husband.
Moisha Maisel.
Oh my God, he's wonderful, and he feels very comfortable. And when the two are in the scenes, I'm sitting there watching. And Tony, again, please understand, I love Tony Shalhoub, but I see him. It feels like he's working really, really hard to be this character to me, whereas Pollak just kind of. It just comes out. He's just really natural. Having said that, Tony and Maren Hinkle, which is another face. You've seen her a dozen times with a dozen different hair colors. I'll warn you that. I sat there and went, I know you, but with different hair. She is wonderful, and their relationship is wonderful, and their chemistry is wonderful. Yeah. But it's some of that... I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about Tony, but there are points where I'm just like, you're really working really, really hard right now. Huh. It's a strange thing, but I love him.
Yeah, no, I just, I didn't get that sense. Okay. And I adore him whenever he's on stage or on screen. I say on stage because what I'm thinking in the back of my head is right after I saw this, I went to New York and I saw this little musical on Broadway called The Band's Visit, which is Tony Shalhoub. In a musical, he only sings a little bit, but he's got a really good voice, and it's a really great show, so we're not going to talk about it too much, but he's on Broadway right now, and he's fabulous.
No, he is wonderful.
Who is less than fabulous is this guy named Michael Zegan as Joel Maisel, the husband who picks up and leaves.
Now, I want you to say what you're going to say, because I think I have something else I want to say.
Okay. You're not supposed to like the character. He's a jerk, he's having an affair with the secretary. He leaves her for no discernible reason. He upends her entire life. He's very shallow. I not only don't like the character, which I think, Amy Sherman-Palladino, well done. I don't like this actor. I feel like if he were just a little bit more charming or a little bit more something, I would understand why Midge is so devastated or why she thought at any point in her life that this was someone that she should marry and be with. It made me like Midge less, that he was just such a wet blanket. And you see these flashbacks throughout the show when they're in college where he kind of seduces her, and her parents never liked him, which made me like the parents even more. But she's like, but he's so, and I'm like, he's so what? Like, it didn't, there was something about it. I think if that role had been recast with someone who is a little bit more charming or seductive or something, even though he's a loser, because we've all met the seductive loser, but I didn't get the seductive part.
Here's what I would say about that. I think it's a character who's very, very weak. A weak character. And so one thing I wanted to say is that I get you don't like the character at all. No. And I'll be honest with you, I don't care for that actor in this role either. And part of it is, as you said, he's not charming. Mm-mm. And so I'm trying to figure out if there's a possibility of separating the character from the actor, because I want to do that, because you like to say it's not, this doesn't reflect on you as the actor, but it's a weird kind of thing, because I don't know if, again, either he's really, 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 really good, mm-hmm. and it's just the character has just pervaded every part of him, so that I'm just like, I wouldn't watch you in a toilet paper commercial, or it's a weird casting choice, because I'm sitting here going, okay, what if it were John Hamm?
Ooh.
Now, is that too charming?
Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, it just and I don't know how much of it is the fault of the writers either. I don't know if Amy Sherman Palladino didn't give him enough charm in the script.
Well,
so he's just playing what is there and trying to do that. All I know is that the combined effort of all these things put together, the acting, the writing, the editing, the directing, the everything, is that I don't understand why she ever married him, and I don't understand why she's even... I mean, I get she's sad because her life just got upended, not because she lost this terrific guy, because that's the point anyway.
And maybe that's part of it, is that it was that life that she likes to plan. And that life that was all planned out, and maybe even when they were dating, here was this nice Jewish guy. And that's important. Mm-hmm. It was very important that he be this nice Jewish guy. Now, he's new money, as opposed to, I'm guessing, older money with her family. But I think that was, it's a nice Jewish guy. She thought he was entertaining. I don't know. Maybe her bar was low. I don't know.
I don't know what it is. But I think there could have been just a slightly more satisfying experience for me if I totally got why she married him, and I totally got why he's so wrong for her. I think those two things can coexist at the same time.
And as the series goes on, as the episodes went on, you did have these flashbacks, and you're right. When you look at it, you're like, wait a minute, he's just as weenie there as he is now. Why the hell would you have hitched your wagon to
slight
this?
Spoiler, as the show goes on, there's this moment for her of, should I go back to him? Should I just give all this up and try to get my old life back? And you're just screaming at your television, no. Like, you are free of this asshole. Like, do not, under any circumstances, go back there.
But she has pressure, and she has pressure from her parents.
I get it, and I get the pressure. Like, I get it. But at the same time, there's not even a sense of, just don't. The last cast member that I wrote down that I wanted to talk about, not because so much of the actor's fine. It's just his inclusion in the show is interesting to me, is Luke Kirby as Lenny Bruce.
Okay, you know what I totally thought of when this started? When this still started, I went, I think that's going to be Lenny Bruce, because they don't say who it is. And then it went in, and it was Lenny Bruce. So she meets Lenny Bruce, and Susie's like, you know who that is? And she's like, no. And she says, Lenny Bruce. And she says, still don't know. And it felt very Forrest Gump.
Kind of.
You remember when they put him in with literally every historical
so Tom
figure?
Hanks is shaking JFK's hand, and you're like, oh, that's, it's cool, but at the same time, it kind of takes you out of the piece, because you're like, how are they going to do that? Now, they didn't CGI Lenny Bruce back into this show, which would have been truly awful.
No, and nobody's heard of Mrs. Maisel, so it's not like she was real as far as that particular name kind of thing. So Lenny Bruce didn't bring her along in real life. It's not a documentary.
No, and I have a big time spoiler, and it's not really a spoiler because you could just read about this in the news. Amy Sherman Palladino has said she knows the moment that the series, not just this season, she knows how the series will end. And I won't say, in case you haven't read that and don't want to know how the entire series ends, I read it and I was like, oh, that's interesting. But you would have heard of Mrs. Maisel in this universe.
Okay.
Yeah, you would have heard of her. And so it kind of is one of those things that if you're going to be writing about someone who's going to eventually become kind of a celebrated figure, then putting real celebrities in there, it's an interesting choice.
Well, it is an interesting choice because that's what you've then decided to say, I'm going to put fiction with nonfiction.
Yeah.
And I will say this, that makes it more complicated for the writer.
Yeah.
You've got to be very careful that you stay true to who we know Lenny Bruce was and how he thought and what he would or would not have done. Yeah. Because there are people alive that remember him. It's,
exactly.
It's not like putting her with Abraham Lincoln. Well, we don't know exactly what he would have said kind of thing. But he would have started it with 4 score. So, ba-dum-bum. But no, I think it's a very interesting thing, and that goes to Amy Sherman Palladino. She's Gilmore Girls, right?
Yep, she did the Gilmore Girls.
So that explains a lot of the very fast kind of back and forth.
Exactly. It's not like Gilmore Girls exactly, but you can definitely see that there's a common thread that unites those two things. Because Gilmore Girls was bada-boom, 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 this fast talky, stuff all the time, which I loved. It kind of echoed even back to some of the movies from the 30s and the 40s. And so Gilmore Girls was a lot of fun for me. This is a period piece, and they're very kind of true to the 50s. And there's the 50s look just permeates everything.
It is so gorgeous.
It's so
It
great.
is so gorgeous.
So great. And even that and the attitudes, and it's just everything about that is just a little bit more muted. But yeah, she's this is her new kind of big thing, and I'm glad she has another hit. I mean, it's a woman showrunner is just who has one big hit is such a rare thing. To come out with something different enough. I mean, it's definitely still got her voice, but it's a very different show. It's
also, though, and this is why we need more diversity, in my opinion, out there, is she's women-centric.
Yeah.
This is another story of female.
Yeah.
And
I don't know that a man would have done this show.
It would have been
not in this way.
It would have been Mad Men. It would have been totally different.
Yeah, because there's something about, we're going to talk about kind of how feminism kind of permeates this in a little bit. But basically, this show is just about somebody who's finding themselves, who's kind of on the wrong path, and not a path that you really blame her for being on, because what other path was she going to choose? Nice Jewish girl from the Upper East Side. But the very first scene, like we said, just kind of tells you, oh, she's the comedian. She's stuck in this housewife role, but she's the one who is, again, the scene was annoying to me, mostly because I was primed to be annoyed. I should probably go back and watch that first scene again and see if I still find it so off-putting.
It's also a weird, when people start a movie or a show or whatever at a wedding, there's a reason that you start at a wedding.
Yeah.
Because of the sense of hope and the idea of idealized romance and whatever. All of that is put onto a wedding, and certainly a wedding scene. And so I think for me, this was a coming of age kind of thing.
Yeah.
And a coming of age can happen. A lot of times it happens during adolescence, but, and certainly based on, the age of what, the 50s and that sort of thing, there was part of America was coming of age. So I think that's not a coincidence that it was set at that particular time.
Yeah. Yeah. And Midge seems, at the beginning, perfectly happy being a perfect Jewish housewife.
It's part of her plan. I told her she likes to plan.
She's baking that casserole, and he's getting off of work, and she's going to be the super supportive wife. She's got the babysitter all lined up, and she's going to go down to the comedy club with him and just look adoringly as he rips off Bob Newhart.
It was again, it's what her mom did. It was what she was trained for. She's doing exactly what she was supposed to do, what she planned to do, and I think that is important, that things, that's where she gets a little discombobulated when things aren't going exactly to plan. We all do that. Everybody does that.
Sure.
When your expectation is one thing, but life takes a left. You what am I doing? You start treading water, and that's what we're watching.
And some
here.
of us have more of a plan than others, and Midge definitely has a plan. And you don't even know if she's that happy with it. I don't know if she chose it. It's just, it's there. The one thing, though, that I did get about this whole finding yourself thing is that, I got a lot of me just being the gay viewer that I am. I kind of, maybe I look for this stuff.
You're gay?
I know.
Damn it.
Right. Is that this is like, to me, this is a whole metaphor about the closet as well. Slight spoiler. It is. No, hear me out. Okay, hear me out. Slight spoiler, by the time the first season ends, the only person in her Upper East Side life, which includes her friends, her parents, her ex's family, the only person in the entire Upper East Side world who knows that she's a comedian is her ex. She's kind of living this double life for almost the entire first season of the show. And
her ex doesn't know she's a comedian.
At the end, he does.
Yeah. Oh, I thought you meant during it. Okay, no, you're right.
By the time the first season is over, only one person knows. And everyone else, like season 2, where this is going to have to go is she's going to have to tell her parents. It's going to be a big coming out story, about, I have something to tell you. This is who I really am. I can't help it. I mean, there's going to be a lot of, to me, there's just going to be a lot of overtones.
You're right. And I can see, and I agree. I think you're exactly right. I hadn't thought of that just because I didn't have to come out as a straight white woman.
Yeah, well.
Nobody asked.
Nobody asked you.
Nobody asked. They all just assumed.
So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, just more about the marvelous Mrs. Maisel and how marvelous it is.
is the marvelous Popperation.
With the marvelous Eric and the marvelous Stacey.
It's true. So we're watching
about the marvelous Mrs. Maisel on Amazon Prime.
Here's the deal. One thing we're talking about this season is that we wanted to talk about a lot things that are accessible.
Uh-huh.
And so I think, the idea of people are binging, that's such a huge thing now. And pretty much, like, I have Netflix and Amazon. But there are people...
I also have Hulu.
Do you have Hulu?
HBO Now.
Okay, so you have... You can have all of these different options available. But I guess, I'm just glad it was so nice to go on there and everybody's talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I have it.
Yep.
And that's just, I just wanted to throw that out there.
I'm to the point now where I only watch one TV show at a time. Right? So there's a new HBO show. Alan Ball has a new show, and maybe we'll talk about it if it's any good. Holly Hunter and Tim Robbins.
I saw that. I saw the preview for that.
I'm not watching it. I'm waiting until they're all out, and I'll binge it when I want to, because I want to watch one TV show at a time.
But
I just want to watch one.
We've talked about this. I read the end of a book first. So I do that so that if I want to make sure that the character that I'm invested in doesn't die or have something awful happen or be the bad guy who's just murdered lots of babies. I like to know because I'm not going to invest my time in that because we ain't got an infinite amount of hours in our lives. So I like the fact that this is all out there so that I don't have to wait each week. That just kills me. I'm spoiled. That is 2018 over it.
I love these. Let's dump every single episode at once.
Now, what was interesting to me, here's what I want to say. So I was talking about the ambiance of that club. Uh-huh. And, Susie has been around. She's clearly been around. She'd had a very different life than Midge.
Absolutely.
Which they talk about this. And Midge comes off, honestly, as pretty naive.
And spoiled.
And having grown up in a bubble. And so everything, like the whole, who is Lenny Bruce, but, and heckling, she has a bad night one night and just can't handle it.
Yeah.
But it's really, which I guess also just kind of told me, that's right, Stacey, that's why you don't do stand-up. I don't. Yeah. It is awful.
So we just talked a couple of weeks ago about a movie, The Big Sick, that also was a comedy featuring stand-up.
That's right.
Right. Comedy's about stand-up is hard because, the stand-up better be funny.
It better be funny because you've just told me that this is a movie about this funny person.
Yeah, and the whole idea is that she's brilliant. Now, this is 50s stand-up, so it can be a little hackneyed, and all I have to do is believe that an audience in 1957 would find this funny, and I did. I agree with you completely on that. That's exactly true. And yet, I was surprised. Some of the routines are still pretty raunchy.
She dropped the F-bomb a lot really early on. And here's, I'm going to say this. This is a little bit of taking me out of the moment in that, so she's in this bubble. We've met her parents. Her mother would no more say, fuck, than fly to the moon. So the idea that Midge comes out and she's just... I was a little... I get that there were some... I mean, she was listening to Red Fox.
Yeah.
Albums.
She started to do her research and started realizing what comedy sounded
But so, again, I know that the raunch was out there in the 50s. I get that. It was there in the 1850s, I'm sure. But here's the deal. It was a little unbelievable for me to think that in the first time she goes out there, she's dropping, and she was raunchy.
But remember,
she was drunk the first couple times.
Her first two sets were drunken rants, and they were not planned comedy sets. She's a naturally funny person who was drunk off her ass, upset about something, and ranting to an audience, and Susie's sitting there going, this is fucking brilliant. The first time she did a set sober, she bombed, which kind of made me think...
It went to her planning. She planned too much.
Yeah. And so what we kind of learn is she needs to be a little uninhibited. She needs to, let loose a little bit. And I did start to wonder, though, and I was really happy that she did bomb more than once. Because I was starting to kind of think, is this show going to make stand-up just look really easy? Like, all you have to do is be funny and get up there and do it. Because, as we've both said, many people have told both of us in our lives, you should do stand-up. And I'm like, if I had the time, maybe. You're like, no. You're like, no. I'm like, but it does take... You got to do a set. You got to do it over, and you got to do it over, and you got to do it over. So, I teach for a living. So I have these classes that I've taught
That's not my point.
Gajillions of times, and I've worked little tiny comedy routines into them, and I always get the laugh. So I kind of feel like, and I'm just up there being me.
Okay, can I say something about this?
But no, I know what you're about to say. It is not the same as facing an audience in a comedy club that is there to laugh, and you'd better be. Now, I think, we've talked about this before, we could both do this if we wanted to. The only thing stopping you from being a stand-up comedian is you have no desire to do it, which is a huge barrier because you really, and that's part of what this show does too, you have to want to do it. In fact, at one point she asked Lenny Bruce, could you do anything else besides this? And he doesn't really answer the question, but in his non-answer, she's like, no, the answer is no. And that's one of the reasons she decides she has to do it as well, because she's asking herself, can I not do this? Now that I've had a taste of it, can I just leave this behind? And for her, the answer is no. And I thought that was important.
I think that's exactly right, in that's the question for a lot of things. I think, honestly, educators, teachers in schools, they have to have – I remember for about 2 minutes in college, I was an education major, literally 2 minutes. And the advisor said, okay, you want to come into this. Here's my question to you. Could you not do it and be okay? And unfortunately, I realized, I could. And so she said, then you need to not be in this. I think that's certainly for these, for stand-up, you're doing it because there is not anything else you want to do or can do. Or
the just having a good night up there on stage and riding the waves of laughter is just such a high that once you've experienced it, you have to go back for more.
And it makes up for all of the other hell that it is. And it's not. And especially for a woman in the 50s. Yeah. Because, Gloria Steinem, nothing had happened women's era-wise except, more subjugation. Yeah.
And yet I have to say, they make enough out of the fact that it's tough to be a comedian in the 50s and it's doubly tough for a woman. But I don't feel like they hammered it home to the point where I think that was just enough, because it was not like, it didn't become this whole feminist anthem. It's still a comedy. It's still really enjoyable to watch. It's still gorgeous. It's still, all of those things that go into it. And yet there were these feminist overtones that were there. They were certainly not, you can't escape them, but they weren't.
Well, here's the thing.
I sound like a dick when I say that, but it's just like it's not. I don't feel like I was being lectured to.
Well, no,
I feel like I was really experiencing something.
Here's the deal. Some of it depends on what are you defining as feminist, and I think that feminist is pro the feminine. That's it. It's not anti anything. Yeah. It's just let's put up that which is feminine, female, that sort of thing, strength, and all of that. With that as a definition, then anything that is going to put women forward as the leads, as the protagonist or antagonist or whatever, is going to be feminist. Yeah. And so I think that this does that. But you're exactly right. The story is not about the feminist movement in America.
Or how hard it is to be a woman. It's just, she is a woman. She's really funny.
You see how it is. It's not, it doesn't have to be a lecture. I mean, she doesn't get beat. So it's not like it's that, but you do see that there is definitely there are expectations that women have that men don't. Yeah. And there is a double standard. Yeah. And you see it, but you see it subtly.
And there's this whole conversation about, you have to decide whether you're going to be funny or attractive. And she's like, what? And I just kind of thought, well, that's ridiculous. And then I kind of thought about it and I'm like, is that still true?
Are you talking about with what's her face?
Yeah.
Jane Lynch. What'd you think about that section? Here's the deal. Jane Lynch comes in as a legendary comic. And so Miriam gets taken to her show and then to meet her afterwards. Now, do you feel like she's not a real person? What was the name of it?
Sophie Lennon.
Sophie Lennon. That's not a real comedian.
No, I looked her up.
But I feel like she was probably an amalgamation of a bunch of people.
Yes, exactly.
But I feel like one stood out to me. I'll tell you what she looked like. She dressed like in between of Moms Mabley and Carol Burnett's washerwoman. Okay. That's what her costume looked like. And she goes out. Her deal was she'd go out on stage as this big, fat, poor country
Bronx
housewife. Yeah, the country was Bronx. But anyway, and she was, very, very much of the working class, poor, crass.
Uh-huh.
And that was just her comedy. And she was selling out.
Yep. She's in the middle of Lincoln Center,
right.
as this.
And then, and again, if it's a spoiler, whatever. You'll have to wait for it. I won't tell you what episode it was in. Miriam goes to visit her, and she's just the opposite in real life.
Yeah.
She is. Her butler has a butler.
Yeah. So the thing is that
But do you think that it was? I had an idea of who I think that it was kind of Phyllis Diller is who, because if you think about who was big, okay, Lucille Ball was, but that wasn't her. She wasn't a stand-up.
No.
But who was funny? Phyllis Diller was the housewife.
Yeah.
Now, she wasn't poor, but she was not attractive. She made herself her hair was nuts. She wore crazy clothes, and her makeup was insane.
Yeah.
So it was just interesting to me.
I thought about Phyllis Diller a lot when I was watching the show. I didn't necessarily put her as that Sophie Lennon character, but you're right, it could have been. But Jane Lynch gives her this whole thing about, you have to make yourself ugly if they're going to laugh at you. And, because, otherwise they're just going to want to have sex with you. And that's, that men are so simple that they can't put those two ideas together about an attractive woman also being funny. And just the larger thing about you have to be somebody else besides who you are. Men can go on stage and do comedy and be themselves. Women have to come up with some crazy character.
Because it makes men too uncomfortable if you were just a regular woman there.
And so I didn't end this hating Jane Lynch necessarily, but I thought you're not really a comic, you're an actress. You're basically doing a one-woman show as somebody else, which is fine. That's an art form, and I've seen people do that. I've seen people write themselves a script and a story about a character that it's not themselves, and they just go on stage and they act. And that's cool, but that's not stand-up. And I think that Midge was kind of like, yeah, but I want to do stand-up. I want to go out there and be me. That's half the reason why it feels so good to have people laugh, because they're laughing with me as I tell them what I'm actually frustrated about, and then kind of getting that.
I don't know if I agree with you as regards the definition. I think the character that Sophie Lennon created, that Jane Lynch played, I feel like that was stand-up, but she wasn't. It was not. I think this was when stand-up was changing, and that realism and who you are as opposed to a character that you're playing. For women, it was changing, but I think it had to start that way.
Yeah, and I think you could argue there's a lack of integrity there, because she's pretending to actually be this person, and she won't let anyone in the public see that her butler has a butler.
Correct.
Because that would ruin her career. So there is this kind of fakey, if she were just out about it, like, oh, I'm not this person, but I play this housewife and people come to see me and they love it, that would be fine. Other things about the show that kind of, okay, so Susie, she's gay, right? She
is. She's totally gay.
Okay.
And you know that immediately.
You do and you don't. It never says.
Well, no, they never ever say it, because why? Who gives a F? You know what I mean? I liked that. And again, I think some of this has to do with a female showrunner. Yeah. Because guess what's not important? Who she sleeps with. So that's not what we talk about.
Well, I mean, okay, so
we talk about her character and what what's important to the story itself. I'm fine with it. Now, if it ends up at some point that she, again, it hasn't happened in this season, that she falls in love with Miriam or something like that.
Or somebody else.
But my point being, that's part of the story. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But again, first of all, I wouldn't be surprised, because I see her and I'm like, I think she's gay. But again, I don't know, because it's never been brought up. But it's okay. It's important because it doesn't effing matter. Her character matters.
Yeah, I think in life you can say, somebody you work with, or who's your lawyer, or who's your, whoever. Okay, it doesn't matter. When a TV show, I actually want to know more about Susie. I do. But that's what it's more than who she sleeps with, who she forms romantic relationships with, and who she's attracted to is a huge part of who she is. And so I'm not saying it's a fault of the show. I'm just saying it's really interesting that they thread this line. On the one hand, they make it so obvious. On the other hand, they kind of go out of their way not to say anything about it. And at one point I was like, does she have a crush on Miriam? Then immediately I was like, no, she doesn't. She doesn't. She sees that this is a straight woman, and this is a professional goal of hers to work with Midge in this way. But then contrasting with that whole lesbian beatnik vibe is all of the very, very traditional feminine role models that are Maren Hinkle as the mother, Caroline Aaron hysterically as her mother-in-law, who's so freaking funny.
You've seen her everywhere. She has been around forever, and she's very funny.
And then a really, really lovely performance, Imogen, the best friend, who I just think she's only in. It feels like she was only in there in little
bits and pieces,
but really, I like her a lot. One of the things
and basically she is still living the life that Miriam started out and planned to live. Yeah. So Imogen is still doing that plan.
Yeah. So
and it's good to have her.
In a couple of weeks, we're going to watch Sliding Doors and talk about it. And like Imogen is Mrs. Maisel had she not caught the train. Right? You'll get that joke later.
That's true.
One of the things I really loved about this is, and it was never really commented on, it was just done very early on when Midge is still married to Joel. She goes to bed looking perfect. Her face is all made up. Her hair is perfectly coiffed, everything. As soon as Joel is asleep, she goes to the bathroom, puts the goop on her face, puts her hair in rollers, does this stuff, and then sets an alarm so that she will wake up before Joel, go back to the bathroom, put herself perfectly together again. So she's slept supposedly in her makeup all night long, but it looks perfect when she gets out of bed. All of this stuff happens, and then like 5 episodes later, you see her mother doing the exact same thing. And I'm like, wow, God, what a life these women had to lead in the 50s, if that's real. I don't know whether that was exaggerated for comic effect or not.
No,
probably not. Some women probably did that.
I think that's the whole idea is that you say, okay, so here's the plan of this life, and the man is going to take care of you, so you don't have to go out and work and deal with all of that, but you really are working. They're still working hard because they have to keep this facade up. Yeah. And no, I don't think everybody did that, but do I think oh, hell yeah. The idea that I don't know if you do you remember, you don't remember this because you're too, and I was really young, and you're younger than me. The Total Woman, you ever heard of that book?
No.
Oh God, why can't I remember the name of the chick? I think it's a Miriam somebody. It's called The Total Woman, and it was this, she would now be part of the, really conservative, right, Christian stuff. But the idea,
kind of
she's
an Anita
the one
Bryant type.
More than that, because she was like, when your husband comes, wrap yourself in Saran wrap when your husband comes home, kind of thing. That was literally an idea. But her thing was, you make sure that his comfort is always, when he's not there, you're keeping the house clean, but you're also making sure that you look good so that when he comes home, he has something to look forward to. And all. I mean, it was all about that. And that's kind of what this reminded me of. This was that part of that whole, it's about the man. That's your job, is to keep him comfortable, to keep him happy, and you looking good and how you present yourself. You don't want him waking up and, next to a monster. Yeah. Which I also thought was funny was the twin beds.
Yes. Yeah. Which,
I thought that was only Dick Van Dyke but apparently maybe that happened in real life too, that people had twin beds and you moved them closer together for moments and then you moved them apart.
Yeah. People...
Because Miriam said, I remember when I was younger and I would hear scraping. And she said, now I know that was them pushing the twin beds apart. Yeah. But that means that when they got married, they had twin beds then. Yeah. It's not like they changed from one. I didn't know. That was weird. But I believe it. I totally believe it.
I totally believe it. And, I know very happy couples who maintain separate bedrooms.
Yes.
One of them snores or one of them just, exudes too much body heat.
Or somebody's a night owl and they read long, there's a lot of reasons why that can happen. And that's, no, I get that. It was just a weird thing. Yeah. Exactly. But it was just an interesting thing.
So we're at the end of season 1 of this show. Season 1 dumped all at one time a little bit ago. We're going to be waiting a little bit for season 2. There will certainly be a season 2. It was a huge hit.
Yes, it was.
So I've kind of already said, here's where I think season 2 is going to go. I'm following the whole closet case thing, and I'm like, she's got to come out to everybody. At some point, people are going to find out that she's not the perfect Jewish divorcee at this point, that she's actually going to comedy clubs and swearing and wearing, leggings and berets and looking like a beatnik. And she's pals with Lenny Bruce, for crying out loud. I mean, she's got a lot of stuff that in her double life, she's got to kind of start to integrate. That's where I see season 2 going. What are you thinking?
I think I agree. I think everybody has to find out about her alternate life. But I also, and this may come from being a mom, her kids, she has 2 kids, which her parents watch, and then some nanny person who I don't know if we ever see, but they mention her.
Yeah.
You know, she's going to stay with Mrs. Bloody Blah or whatever. I just feel like they should. That should be a plot point as well, because the son is like 4 or something like that, and that, you know, the fact that your parents are divorced in the 50s, which was not. That was a big deal because it didn't happen all the time. You know, the percentages for divorce were not what they are now. But also, you know, where is my mom? Where, you know, who is influencing him and that sort of thing. So I guess some of the familial relationships, but not just the ones that we've seen a lot of so far. I want to see, how are you dealing with, you're a mom too.
Yeah.
And, you know, this is a huge liberating kind of thing for you, and I'm happy for you. And were you single, I would say go for it 100%. But at the same time, I'm going, you got kids, man. You need to spend a little time with them. And I say that of a man as well.
Sure.
But it just happens. This is a story about a woman. So I want to see how that happens, because we've seen how she got to where she is now. Okay, and Susie and the agents and the other comedians. We didn't talk about, there was when she was almost went into a partnership comedic thing. But anyway, it's a fun series. I think people should watch it. If you get through the first episode, you'll be fine.
Yeah, and maybe you'll love the first episode. My friends did. They said, "Oh, I loved it as soon as I started it." I'm like, yeah, it took me a while to warm up.
Clearly, it took me a while to warm up. but I did.
My final diagnosis on this show. One thing I want to say before I get there, I agree with you about the kids. I actually wondered halfway through season 1, it's like they could have written her as to be a divorcee that didn't have kids yet. Mm-hmm. That could have made things a lot simpler.
She's young enough.
I kind of felt like, wow, the kids are just kind of this thing that's barely spoken about, and it bugged me that she was a mom, and really I didn't see her even giving a lot of mental energy to her kids. No. And so that was something I kind of judged her a little bit, and I kind of, but you're right, season 2, it might just be meat for some more dramatic
I hope
stuff.
so.
Yeah. My final diagnosis on this show is that I'm really glad that my friends pressured, don't do it again, by the way, because I don't like being told what to watch, but I'm really glad that Faye and Sydney and others said, oh, you've really got to watch the show. You'd really love it, because it is a good fit for me. I love being immersed into a whole new world, and I felt like I was just sucked back into 1957 every time I did it. It's not the most realistic thing in the world.
No, it's beautiful.
But the costumes are gorgeous, and the period details are so good, and they spent a lot of money on the show. I mean, it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. The design of the whole thing is just fantastic, and the performances by and large are just really, really great, and I'm into these characters. I want to see where they go. Yep,
I think it's going to be good, but we do totally say watch The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. It is indeed marvelous.
That's it for this week. I'm Eric.
I'm Stacey.
Subscribe, and we will see you soon.
You've been listening to Popperation with Eric and Stacey, the podcast that dissects popular culture one bloody organ at a time. Subscribe today on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, YouTube, and any other podcast listening site or app. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Popperation Room. Check out our website at popperationroom.com for all of the podcasts, our blog, swag, and games. Until next time, when we're back in the scrubs.